Pilarium, you're actually doing a pretty good job with some of these quality of life improvements. I'd like to suggest a few more. Hello, everyone. Bront, CatHerder here. We're having some fun talking Raid Shadow Legends, and we are here. I mean, we're on my free to play, but it really doesn't matter what account we're on. We're going to talk a little bit about some quality of life improvements. Now, for those of you that are not aware, Pilarium is actually going to be bringing some interesting quality of life improvements to the game, particularly in the Forge, and, a few other things as well. They're fixing a few things in the shop, and they've generally been pushing for some quality of life improvements. They have added background battles, and they plan on actually improving background battles until they are significantly more useful than they currently are, but they're making steps. They have done some stuff to tweak the tavern, they've done some stuff to tweak all kinds of parts of this game, and I do want to give them some pretty good kudos for that. But I want to talk a little bit about some things that I think that they could do. Most of these are honestly pretty small, but things that would make a pretty big quality of life adjustment. I think some of these things would be honestly pretty big shifts. Some of these would be lesser shifts. They're not going to target every player, but these are a few quality of life improvements that I think would be great for the game. So one of the biggest things that have been a huge quality of life improvement are these substat and primary stat filters. They're absolutely amazing. Plus there's the ability to make priority stats so you can kind of sort things to and from. I think you need to take these one step further. I should be able to take a look at the substat and have speed. Okay, now only show things that have the substat of speed. And then click this again to have it show me only things that don't have speed, or don't have resistance, or don't have crit damage, or don't have crit rate, or combination thereof. There's a lot of reasons to do this. There are builds where I do want as little crit rate as possible. There are sometimes builds where I don't want resistance. Sometimes I'm trying to build things that have resistance or accuracy, and sometimes I actually want to save those pieces for champions that might actually need them. So perhaps I might look for pieces that are specifically missing accuracy to avoid putting accuracy on a champion I don't need or maybe don't want accuracy on. So there's all kinds of reasons that have negative filters. The biggest of which, however, is that it would just make sorting gear and filtering gear and cleansing gear, which is a big nightmare right now, just a little bit better. Pilarium, I think you can do it. We can certainly already do some walkarounds, and if we do the priority stats where you can priority sort by a particular stat and then just leave it in there. So maybe if you sort by accuracy and then look at the bottom, you can see the stuff without accuracy. But being able to simply tell it, I don't want to see pieces that have accuracy on the substats or even on the main stats. Maybe I specifically want to look at all chests other than resistance chests, or maybe I want to look at all chests that aren't attack percent chests. There's all kinds of things I could certainly see that make a lot of sense to be able to exclude specific things. So Pilarium, make it happen. One of the things I think would make this game just a little bit better is if Pilarium would be willing to go through some of these skill descriptions, clean them up just a little bit, and maybe kind of standardize how they make them work. And I'm just looking at Delver here as an example of one that I think they could certainly change, and I could give a very clear example of. Now, she attacks all enemies and then places increased attack on this champion before attacking. If you literally have it, anything that's done before an attack is listed first, then the attack is listed second, and then anything that happens as a result of the attack then proceeds to happen third. That would actually be very, very helpful in organizing how these work, making people understand how the skills work and the order of how the skills work as well. Because in some cases, the order of these can make a difference, particularly when you're involving things like sheep that can interrupt something in the middle, placing specific debuffs. There are several other things like extending the duration of buffs or debuffs. The wording is different depending on the champion in some cases. And to be fair, I understand some of these may actually be translation errors because I'm very sure that Pilarium's main language is not English. So some of this stuff may literally just be translation errors. But I really think you can unify how these skills are coded and how these, not to say how they're coded, but how they are described to make sure that they are easy to understand. You've gotten better with it with newer champions, and as newer champions get more complex kits, this becomes more and more important. So I think this would be a good use of some resources. It would also give you a chance to maybe revise a couple champions that you maybe haven't been revising beforehand. You've been certainly doing some buffing of a few champions here or there. It's about 2 per month, which honestly feels very, very slow. And since you haven't even touched epics or rares in some cases as well, perhaps this will give you a chance to clean up a few rares and a few epics, take a look at some of their kits and maybe say, hey, just a few tweaks here or there, and this goes from an absolute trash epic to an epic that could be usable on an early game account. One of the things that I think would actually be very, very helpful for Polarium to do to basically buff some of these sets is make a lot of these 4-piece sets, especially ones that just feel kind of inadequate, into 2-piece sets. I think it would actually be very helpful, especially because you have several of these 2-piece sets that are better than some of these 4-piece sets. Reflex, for example, still honestly, Reflex is a good set, so it's probably not the best example here. You've already got, high-level pieces of Merciless, for example, can certainly do some of what Reflex does as well. But maybe Cursed is a good example. Cursed does a 50% chance of placing Hex. Well, why not allow me to have a 2-piece set that does a 25% chance of placing Hex? Or Provoke having a 2-piece set that does a 15% chance of placing a Provoke. So if I wanted to go with a 6-piece Provoke for a Hydra build, for example, it might actually make some sense. Now, the ability to make it a 2, 4, and 6-piece set offers these sets significant amount of flexibility. It offers them a spot on a champion that might otherwise be in a 6-piece progressive set, one of the 9-piece sets that you have out there, the variable pieces, for example. It makes them significantly more useful in those situations as well. Plus, it gives a bunch of interesting options. Affinity Breaker is a good example of one that I think would be great as a 2-piece set, because as a 2-piece set of Affinity Breaker, I could see me putting that on some nukers with the Savage instead of Stone Skin, instead of something else, because it might actually help me take a nuker and make them just a little bit better at doing damage against, off affinity champions they might be attacking in arena. So there's all kinds of cool things you could do for a lot of these sets. Now, not every set. For example, I think Regeneration is fine as a 4-piece set. I think Savage is actually good as a 4-piece set. I think Stun is probably marginally dangerous to put as anything other than a 4-piece set. But in general, a lot of the sets that are lesser used, generally viewed as lesser and less exciting, making them 2-piece sets would actually increase their value quite a bit, because you could go with just a 2-piece set to put on somebody. For example, Retaliation used to be a 4-piece set, and now it's a 2-piece set. And as a result, it's actually gotten a boost in use and overall community sentiment, because that 2-piece Retaliation set could be very interesting to fit on a champion. It makes it a lot easier to get at least the 2-piece set. And there's some interesting ideas to put the Retaliation set along with other things on a champion, say in Clan Boss, but as a 4-piece set, it becomes much, much harder to do. Now, this is not a huge complaint, but you've got Doom Tower, Cursed City, and Siege all the way over here. It would be kind of nice to maybe group them up just a little bit. You've got almost everything arena related in the arena. You've got all your clan bosses in the clan boss. Obviously, faction wars, dungeons, and campaign are mixed pretty well. Maybe if these things kind of were all city related, you could turn them into the city, or maybe make it some sort of city thing. And you could have Cursed City and Doom Tower and Siege all under one area. The other thing I think that would be helpful with is once you have all 3 of them in one area, you could make an aura that instead of just being the Doom Tower aura, you could have the Doom Tower, Cursed City, and Siege aura. You'd call it City auras, for example. That's just an example. You can certainly find something to do that you want to call it better on. But what it means is some of these champions that have Doom Tower auras would suddenly be useful in Siege because they would have interesting auras. You could actually start releasing more auras that would help in Doom Tower, but they would also help in Siege, which would be an interesting thing for players that are doing PvP, and also in Cursed City, which is a great place to have unique auras to offer unique builds and unique ways to tackle Cursed City. It would make Siege feel different from Arena, because the auras would not be just, oh, I can only use all area auras, and that's it. And it's definitely not I can only use arena auras or all area auras, because that really is going to make the arena auras that much more powerful. I think having our own separate faction auras, or not faction auras, but their own different set of auras that would fit for Doom Tower, Cursed City, and Siege would make interesting uses of champions like Lady Kimmy or Lana Tharl, are 2 that have some of the better Doom Tower auras that already exist, and a couple other champions that maybe could get a Doom Tower aura or something like that. You could release a new Doom Tower-ish aura champion, because you haven't released one in quite a long time, because it's certainly not content you're focused on, and it would actually be useful in content you are focused on and you want people to pay attention to. Look, Polarium, I get it. You're not going to change much about campaign. and I get that. I'm not asking you to add other areas of campaign, but if you notice, there is no place to farm a dwarf, a shadowkin, or a sylvan watcher rare in campaign. It's the only thing you cannot farm in campaign as far as champions for a faction is concerned. This can be problematic, especially in faction wars, where there's the chance that you could get stuck with the have a rare in faction wars quest. And early on, if you don't have one of those champions, well, for every other faction, you can just go and farm one. But for this factions, you can't, which means you basically have to pull all your mystery shards and hope you get lucky, or maybe you just don't do that quest. Now, this is not the biggest deal in the world, and honestly, I think it would be really cool if you added a dwarf section, a shadowkin section, a sylvan watcher section, and whatever this hidden one behind me is section 2 to campaign. I think it'd be kind of fun, but it would involve revamping campaign a bit. You would suddenly have to have a couple more campaign sets, or basically take existing sets and throw them into campaign. I don't think either of them is a great idea, but maybe, especially in a couple cases where you have multiple farmable rares of the same type, maybe instead of having 2 different barbarians where you might only have one of something else, maybe one of those barbarians becomes a dwarf or a sylvan watcher, or maybe a high elf becomes a silver watcher, or a demon spawn becomes a shadowkin because they happen to be hunting in the area, something like that. You could certainly figure out ways to add it into the story, but I think that even if you don't add it into the story, just adding them to campaign, even if it's just an addition to what you already have, would really help out people that might actually want to get a rare dwarf, a rare shadowkin, or a rare sylvan watcher. Polarium, I hate to tell you this, but core hammers suck. Core hammers are a horrible, horrible reward in any tournament. I avoid them at all costs on my main, I avoid them at all costs on my alt, and I avoid them at all costs on my free-to-play. They are not a reason to do any event. They feel like a spot that is taken up that could have been anything else that would have been more useful. Charms for the Forge? Great, I can possibly use those. They have an actual use in the game. Brews are great. Brews have an actual use in the game. Books, great. Would love some rare books. Those seem to be pretty hard to find. Heck, even put just plain old these materials here, the Magisteel that you can normally only get in Arena, they would be more useful than core hammers. Core hammers only let you forge these 2 sets right here. These 2 sets have been amazingly power crept. They're just not particularly useful in the game. You see a little bit of Swift Parry here and there still. Swift Parry is not necessarily out, but Deflection has never been a good or a meta set. It just doesn't do enough. It doesn't work well enough, and it takes so much extra Magisteel and so many of these other resources to forge that nobody forges it other than for the quests that they have to do it for Ramontu. So maybe it's time to put core hammers to bed. Maybe you replace them with something else. Maybe you find another way to use core hammers that actually becomes interesting and useful. I don't know, but core hammers really kind of suck as you have them implemented right now. And honestly, if they disappeared from the game, I think everybody would be happy, because for the most part, the only thing core hammers exist to do is to be a reward that you don't want in an event. And finally, probably the biggest quality of life improvement is keep making quality of life improvements. Polarium, as I mentioned before in the beginning of this video, you've actually done a pretty good job of adding some cool stuff to the game. Has it all been great? No, it's not all been great. Has everything been as good as it could have been? No, a lot of stuff has been just kind of okay. But you have done a really good job overall of making continued quality of life improvements, at least over the past 6 months to a year. And honestly, even before then, there's a few things that have improved in the game that you have spent some time in improving. I appreciate that you are listening to the players. I appreciate you are listening to the content creators. Keep doing it. It shows you care about the game. It shows that you are invested in the players' well-being, and it shows that this game is more than just something that is trying to separate you from money. And I think that that is a huge win for player sentiment, because even if you miss on a quality of life improvement and don't go all the way with it, generally you are still applauded for making an effort with some of these things. Keep on going, keep on pushing, Keep listening when people continue to give you good feedback. And I understand there's a lot of feedback that may feel good that you may not be able to do for some reason. There's a lot of feedback that some person might think is good that actually isn't. But that's why this is a community, and you get a bunch of community feedback on this. Look at what the community wants, listen to some of their pain points, listen to people like myself, like Hell Hades, like Ash, like Big Papa Drock, I'm naming a couple of big content creators and myself, but content creators like us do hear the pulse of the community, and some of our pain points are the pain points of the community as well. Listen to us, listen to the community, listen to feedback, and keep making these quality of life improvements. You've done an amazing job so far, continuing to make Raid a great game in 2025 for its 6th year anniversary. Let's keep it going for anniversary number 10. So guys, I really appreciate you guys hanging around. Hopefully you enjoyed this video. I know it's a little bit different from some of the stuff I do, but I kind of wanted to talk about the quality of life stuff because it is something that Plarium has been focusing on more, and I think it's worth calling out some of these interesting things. Anything you think I'm maybe talking too much about, maybe things that you don't think are particularly important that I mentioned, or maybe things you agree with me, or maybe you've got your own idea on something that would be a great quality of life improvement. I would love to hear it. And to be fair, I'm not expecting everything to be gold. It might be your pet peeve. I may not agree with it. This is, community feedback is not going to be everybody agreeing on the same thing. And that's fine. Let's hear your discussions. Let's have some great discussions in the comments. Let's keep it civil. And you know what? Hit that like button and hit that subscribe button while you're down there below. I really do appreciate it. I will catch you all later. And until the next video, I'm Bront CatHerder.